Captain James Morrison had served the royal family for 37 years. His weathered hands bore the scars of countless hours training new guards, and his silver beard spoke of decades spent protecting those who lived behind palace walls. Every morning at precisely 5:30, he would inspect his uniform in the mirror of his modest quarters, ensuring every button gleamed and every crease sat perfectly. Today felt different, though, as if the morning light carried whispers of change. The palace corridors echoed with James's familiar footsteps as he made his rounds. He knew every stone, every painting, every secret passage that wound through the ancient building. Other guards often joked that James could navigate the palace blindfolded, and they weren't wrong. His dedication had earned him the respect of 3 generations of royalty. But more importantly, it had given his life profound meaning. Prince George, now 12 years old, had grown up under James's watchful eye. The captain remembered when the prince was barely walking, stumbling through the same halls that James now patrolled with military precision. Over the years, he had witnessed the young prince's transformation from a curious toddler into a thoughtful boy who carried himself with quiet dignity. Unlike other children his age, Prince George seemed to understand the weight of his future responsibilities, often observing the world around him with unusual intensity. James had always maintained proper distance as protocol demanded. He was a protector, not a friend or family member. Yet something about Prince George's gentle nature had touched the old guard's heart. The boy never demanded special treatment, never threw tantrums when things didn't go his way, and always acknowledged the palace staff with genuine kindness. These small gestures hadn't gone unnoticed by James, who had seen enough entitled behavior from nobility to appreciate genuine humility. The morning routine continued as usual, with James checking security points and coordinating with his team. His assistant, Officer Thompson, often marveled at the captain's energy despite his advancing years. James moved with the same purposeful stride he had possessed decades earlier, though lately he found himself pausing longer at windows, gazing out at the gardens where Prince George often played with his siblings. During lunch break, James sat in the staff quarters, sharing tea with fellow guards who had become like family over the years. They discussed upcoming security arrangements for a state dinner, routine matters that James had handled countless times before. Yet his mind wandered to conversations he had overheard about his approaching retirement. The palace administration had been dropping subtle hints about succession planning, though James had skillfully avoided those discussions. The afternoon brought its usual rhythm of patrols and briefings. James noticed Prince George in the library, quietly reading while his tutor reviewed lessons nearby. The boy's concentration impressed everyone who worked with him, and James often wondered what thoughts occupied such a young mind. There was something almost otherworldly about Prince George's composure, as if he possessed wisdom beyond his years. As evening approached, James completed his final security check. The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, with only essential staff remaining on duty. He stood for a moment in the main hallway, surrounded by portraits of monarchs past, wondering how many other loyal servants had walked these same paths throughout history. The weight of tradition felt both comforting and overwhelming. His small apartment awaited him, filled with memories accumulated over nearly 4 decades of service. Photographs from royal ceremonies lined his dresser, capturing moments when he had stood proudly in the background, ensuring safety while history unfolded. A letter from the Queen Mother, thanking him for his dedication during a particularly challenging security situation, held a place of honor on his bookshelf. James prepared for bed with the same methodical attention he brought to everything else. Tomorrow would bring another day of service, another opportunity to fulfill the oath he had taken so long ago. Yet something stirred in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. Change was coming, he could sense it, though its exact nature remained mysterious. Prince George's recent behavior had been different somehow, more observant, more intentional in his interactions with the staff. Sleep came slowly to the old captain that night. His dreams were filled with images of palace corridors and royal ceremonies, mixed with memories of watching Prince George grow from a small child into the remarkable young person he was becoming. In his unconscious mind, James sensed that his long chapter of service was approaching a significant turning point, though he had no idea how profoundly the next few days would change everything he thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and the true meaning of nobility. The next morning arrived with unexpected drama. James received an urgent call from the head of palace security, informing him that several staff members had called in sick with a sudden flu outbreak. This meant extended shifts for everyone, including himself. At his age, working additional hours presented challenges, but James never complained. His sense of duty ran too deep for such concerns. Prince George appeared earlier than usual in the breakfast room, dressed impeccably as always, but carrying an unusual air of purpose. James noticed the boy's eyes scanning the reduced staff with what seemed like genuine concern. Most children his age would barely notice such details. Yet Prince George seemed acutely aware of the additional burden placed on everyone present. During the morning briefing, James learned that several important diplomatic meetings were scheduled throughout the day. The reduced security staff would need to coordinate perfectly to maintain proper protection protocols. His experience became invaluable as younger guards looked to him for guidance on managing the complex logistics with fewer personnel. As the day progressed, James found himself covering additional posts while maintaining his regular responsibilities. His legs ached more than usual, and his breathing became slightly labored during particularly busy periods. Officer Thompson offered to take over some duties, but James politely declined, insisting that experience mattered most during challenging times like these. Prince George spent much of the morning in meetings with his tutors, but James noticed the boy frequently glancing toward the guards posted nearby. There was something almost studious about his observation, as if he was trying to understand something beyond the obvious security arrangements. The prince's behavior struck James as unusually attentive, even for someone known for his thoughtfulness. Lunch came later than usual due to the hectic schedule. James grabbed a quick sandwich while reviewing afternoon security protocols. The diplomatic meetings would require precise coordination, especially with limited staff. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes protection work, the same feeling that had sustained him through decades of service. The afternoon meetings proceeded smoothly, thanks largely to James's careful planning and the dedication of his remaining team. He positioned himself strategically, ensuring optimal coverage while mentally tracking potential vulnerabilities. His reputation for anticipating problems before they occurred had been built through countless situations like this one. Between meetings, James noticed Prince George approaching one of the younger guards who looked overwhelmed by the increased responsibilities. The prince spoke quietly to the guard, offering what appeared to be words of encouragement. James watched this interaction with growing interest, recognizing leadership qualities that went far beyond the boy's royal training. As evening approached, exhaustion began taking its toll on James. His usual steady pace slowed slightly, and he found himself gripping railings more firmly when climbing stairs. The extended shift was proving more challenging than he had anticipated, though his pride prevented him from admitting weakness to his colleagues. The final diplomatic meeting of the day required James's presence in the formal reception room. He stood at attention, maintaining perfect posture despite the fatigue settling into his bones. Prince George entered with several family members, greeting the foreign dignitaries with practiced grace. James felt the familiar pride of watching the young prince represent his family with such dignity. During a quiet moment in the reception, James noticed Prince George's eyes meeting his across the room. The boy's expression carried unusual intensity, almost as if he was trying to communicate something without words. James maintained professional composure, but something about the prince's gaze unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. The reception concluded successfully, with all diplomatic protocols observed perfectly. As guests departed and the formal atmosphere relaxed, James began his end-of-day security sweep. His movements were slower than usual, and he paused occasionally to catch his breath. The long day had pushed his endurance to its limits. While completing his final rounds, James encountered Prince George in one of the quieter corridors. The boy was alone, which was unusual, and seemed to be waiting for something or someone. Their eyes met again, and this time Prince George offered a small, knowing smile that sent an unexpected chill down James's spine. Back in his quarters that night, James reflected on the day's events with growing unease. Prince George's behavior had been subtly different, more purposeful and observant than ever before. The boy's attention to the guard's welfare, his unusual timing throughout the day, and especially those intense moments of eye contact, suggested something significant was developing. Sleep proved elusive as James's mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. His body ached from the extended shift, reminding him of his advancing years and the physical demands of his position. For the first time in decades, he wondered seriously about his future at the palace and what changes might be approaching faster than he had anticipated. The third day brought an announcement that would change everything. Palace administrators called an emergency meeting for all senior staff, including James. As he entered the conference room, he noticed the somber expressions of his colleagues and felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. These unscheduled gatherings rarely brought pleasant news. The palace secretary delivered the information with characteristic directness. Budget constraints and modernization efforts would require significant changes to the security department. Several long-time positions would be eliminated, and remaining staff would need to adapt to new technologies and protocols. James listened with growing dread, recognizing that his traditional methods might no longer align with the palace's evolving needs. After the meeting, James walked the corridors with heavy steps. Younger guards gathered in small groups discussing the implications of the announced changes. He overheard conversations about early retirement packages and voluntary departures. The familiar palace suddenly felt less welcoming, as if the very walls sensed the uncertainty ahead. Prince George appeared unexpectedly in the main hallway, approaching James with unusual boldness. The boy had never initiated direct conversation before, always maintaining proper protocol in their interactions. James straightened instinctively, preparing for whatever the young prince might say. The moment felt charged with significance neither could fully understand. Instead of speaking, Prince George simply walked alongside James for several minutes. Their pace matched perfectly, as if they had coordinated this silent companionship beforehand. Other staff members noticed the unusual pairing, but maintained respectful distance, sensing something important was occurring between the old guard and the young prince. During lunch, James received an unexpected summons to report to the head of security's office. His heart raced as he climbed the familiar stairs, wondering if his decades of loyal service were about to come to an abrupt end. The meeting room held several senior administrators, their faces revealing nothing about the nature of this gathering. The conversation that followed exceeded James's worst expectations. His position would indeed be eliminated within the next month, though he would receive a generous retirement package in recognition of his long service. The administrator spoke respectfully about his contributions, while delivering news that felt like a punch to his chest. 37 years of dedication, ending with a bureaucratic decision made by people who had never walked his patrols. James accepted the news with outward dignity, though inside his world was crumbling. He had always imagined retiring voluntarily, choosing his own timing and manner of departure. This forced conclusion felt wrong, as if his story was being rewritten by others without his consent. The palace that had been his life's work was essentially asking him to leave. Walking back to his post, James struggled to maintain composure. Fellow guards would notice any change in his demeanor, and he refused to display weakness during what might be his final weeks of service. The corridors that had been sources of comfort now felt like paths leading toward an unwanted destination. Prince George appeared again near the library, and this time his presence seemed intentional rather than coincidental. The boy's eyes held unusual depth, as if he understood more about the day's events than seemed possible for someone his age. James wondered if the prince had somehow learned about the security department changes. The afternoon shift passed in a blur of routine activities that felt surreal given the morning's revelations. James performed each duty with mechanical precision, his mind simultaneously processing the end of his career and trying to imagine life beyond these walls. The future stretched ahead like an empty landscape, devoid of the purpose that had sustained him for decades. Evening brought temporary solitude in his quarters, where James finally allowed himself to feel the full impact of the day's events. He looked at photographs from royal ceremonies, wondering if these memories would be enough to fill the years ahead. The apartment that had been his sanctuary now felt like a temporary shelter before exile. A soft knock at his door interrupted these dark thoughts. James opened it to find a palace messenger with an envelope bearing Prince George's personal seal. Inside was a handwritten note requesting a private meeting the following evening after regular duties concluded. The boy's elegant penmanship conveyed unusual formality for someone so young. Reading the note repeatedly, James felt a mixture of curiosity and concern. Private meetings between guards and royal family members were highly unusual and potentially problematic. Yet something about Prince George's recent behavior suggested this request held significance beyond mere protocol violation. The boy seemed to be orchestrating events with purpose that defied his age. Sleep came fitfully, with James's dreams mixing memories of past service with anxiety about an uncertain future. The private meeting with Prince George loomed like a mystery that might provide answers or create additional complications. Whatever the young prince wanted to discuss, James sensed it would mark another turning point in his rapidly changing circumstances. The night passed slowly, filled with questions about duty, loyalty, and the strange relationship developing between an aging guard and a thoughtful young prince who seemed to understand far more than anyone realized. The fourth day arrived with James feeling like he was walking through someone else's life. Every familiar routine now carried the weight of impending conclusion, transforming simple tasks into potential final performances. He dressed with extra care, ensuring his uniform met the same exacting standards he had maintained for 37 years, though uncertainty clouded every motion. During morning briefings, James noticed his colleagues treating him differently. Some offered sympathetic glances while others seemed uncomfortable, as if his situation might somehow be contagious. The news of his forced retirement had apparently spread throughout the security department, creating an atmosphere of awkwardness that made routine conversations feel strained and artificial. Prince George appeared in the breakfast room earlier than usual, his presence somehow more commanding despite his young age. James observed the boy's interactions with other staff members, noting how the prince seemed to be paying unusual attention to their responses and comfort levels. There was something almost investigative about his behavior, as if he was gathering information for some unknown purpose. The morning passed with James performing his duties, while mentally cataloging experiences that would soon become memories. He found himself studying details he had previously taken for granted, from the way sunlight filtered through ancient windows to the sound his footsteps made on marble floors. These sensory impressions suddenly felt precious, like artifacts of a life he was being forced to abandon. Around midday, James received another unexpected development. Officer Thompson approached with news that Prince George had specifically requested James be assigned to his personal security detail for the remainder of the week. This was highly unusual, as royal family members rarely made specific requests about individual guards. The assignment felt like both an honor and a complication. Standing outside Prince George's private study, James felt the weight of the boy's attention in a way that defied protocol. The prince worked quietly at his desk, occasionally glancing up with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. James maintained professional composure, while wondering what thoughts occupied such a young but obviously complex mind. During lunch, James overheard conversations about palace modernization plans that extended beyond security changes. Staff members discussed new technologies, updated protocols, and efficiency measures that would transform how the royal household operated. The institution he had served faithfully was evolving into something he might not recognize, making his departure feel less personal and more inevitable. The afternoon brought an incident that would change everything. While escorting Prince George through the palace gardens, James suddenly felt dizzy and stumbled slightly. The 12-year-old prince immediately noticed, moving closer with genuine concern rather than the formal distance usually maintained between royalty and staff. For a moment, the age difference disappeared as one human being worried about another. Prince George quietly suggested they sit on a nearby bench, framing the request as his own need for rest, rather than acknowledging James's momentary weakness. This small act of kindness, disguised as princely preference, touched James more deeply than any official recognition he had ever received. The boy's emotional intelligence surpassed that of many adults James had encountered. As they sat together in the garden, Prince George began speaking about the palace staff with unusual insight. He mentioned specific guards by name, discussing their families, their years of service, and their contributions to royal security. James realized the prince had been paying attention to details that most people in his position would never notice or remember. The conversation revealed that Prince George understood far more about the recent security department changes than anyone had imagined. He spoke about the unfairness of forcing dedicated employees into retirement and questioned whether efficiency improvements were worth losing experienced personnel. His words carried weight beyond his years, suggesting a moral clarity that impressed James greatly. Evening approached with James feeling more conflicted than ever about his situation. Prince George's attention had transformed what felt like professional failure into something resembling recognition of his true worth. The boy seemed to see him as more than just a security asset, acknowledging the human dimension of his service in ways that administrative decisions had failed to consider. The scheduled private meeting loomed larger as darkness fell. James completed his regular duties while anticipating whatever Prince George wanted to discuss away from official supervision. The day's interactions had already exceeded normal protocols, suggesting the evening conversation would venture into territory that might challenge everything James understood about his position and purpose. Preparing for the meeting, James wondered if Prince George was planning something that would complicate both their lives. The boy's recent behavior indicated careful planning and purposeful action that seemed unusual for someone his age. Whatever was coming, James sensed it would mark another significant turning point in his rapidly changing circumstances. The palace settled into evening quiet, with most staff completing their shifts and retiring to quarters. James remained on duty, waiting for the mysterious meeting that would either provide clarity or create additional complications in his already uncertain future. The private meeting took place in Prince George's personal sitting room, a space James had secured countless times but never entered as anything other than a guard. The room reflected the boy's personality, with books stacked neatly on every surface and artwork that suggested interest beyond typical royal hobbies. Prince George gestured for James to sit, immediately breaking protocol in a way that felt both natural and significant. What followed was unlike any conversation James had experienced in 37 years of service. Prince George spoke with startling directness about the security department changes, revealing knowledge that should have been restricted to senior administrators. The boy had somehow learned not only about James's forced retirement but also about similar situations affecting other longtime staff members throughout the palace. Prince George's words carried genuine anger about the treatment of loyal employees, though his tone remained controlled and thoughtful. He described the situation as morally wrong, arguing that experience and dedication should be valued above efficiency measurements and budget considerations. James listened with growing amazement as this 12-year-old articulated concerns that matched his own feelings perfectly. The prince then revealed something that left James speechless. He had been quietly documenting the contributions of various staff members, creating detailed records of their service that went far beyond official personnel files. Prince George had observed, remembered, and valued the human elements that administrative decisions seemed to ignore completely. For James, this recognition felt more meaningful than any formal award or ceremony. Prince George spoke about specific instances where James had gone beyond his duties, moments the captain had assumed went unnoticed by anyone important. The boy had been watching, learning, and appreciating the dedication that others took for granted or dismissed as merely doing one's job. The conversation then took an unexpected turn. Prince George asked James to help him understand how security really worked, not the sanitized version presented in official reports, but the practical reality of protecting people and maintaining safety. The boy wanted to learn from someone whose experience extended across decades rather than months or years. James found himself explaining complex security concepts to someone who listened with remarkable focus and asked intelligent questions. Prince George seemed particularly interested in the human elements of protection work, the relationships and trust that made formal protocols actually function effectively. His curiosity went beyond academic interest to genuine desire for understanding. As the evening progressed, James realized he was participating in something unprecedented. Prince George was essentially conducting an informal education session, but the roles were more complex than simple teacher and student. The boy brought insights about leadership and responsibility that challenged James to think about his own experience in new ways. Prince George then shared his own observations about palace life, describing how he had noticed the disconnect between official policies and their impact on real people. He spoke about the loneliness of his position and his desire to understand the experiences of those who served his family. The conversation revealed depth and empathy that few people possessed at any age. The most surprising moment came when Prince George directly asked for James's advice about leadership. The boy wanted to know how to balance efficiency with humanity, how to make decisions that honored both practical necessities and moral obligations. James found himself discussing principles he had never articulated before, drawing from decades of experience to offer guidance to someone who might someday hold tremendous responsibility. Time seemed suspended as they talked, with James gradually forgetting the unusual nature of their interaction. Prince George created an atmosphere where honest conversation felt natural, rather than forbidden. The boy's questions pushed James to examine his own beliefs about duty, loyalty, and the meaning of service in ways that surprised him. Near midnight, Prince George made an announcement that changed everything. He revealed that he had been working behind the scenes, using his unique position to influence decisions about the security department changes. The boy had been quietly advocating for reconsideration of the forced retirements. Though he hadn't yet shared the results of his efforts, James felt a mixture of gratitude and concern about Prince George's intervention on his behalf. The idea that a 12-year-old was challenging administrative decisions seemed both touching and potentially problematic. He wondered about the consequences the prince might face for involving himself in matters that others considered beyond his authority or interest. The evening concluded with Prince George making a request that left James emotionally shaken. The boy asked him to stay at the palace regardless of administrative decisions, offering personal employment that would continue their working relationship under different terms. The proposal represented loyalty that transcended official protocols and touched something deep in James's heart. Walking back to his quarters, James felt like his entire understanding of his situation had been transformed. Prince George had revealed himself as far more than a well-mannered child, demonstrating wisdom, courage, and compassion that exceeded anything James had expected. The evening had changed their relationship in ways that neither could fully comprehend yet. The next morning brought news that stunned everyone in the security department. James arrived for duty to find his colleagues buzzing with excitement about an unprecedented development. Senior palace administrators had called an emergency meeting to discuss reversing several of the announced staff changes, specifically mentioning the forced retirement of experienced personnel. Officer Thompson approached James with barely contained enthusiasm, explaining that someone with significant influence had apparently intervened in the budget discussions. The details remained unclear, but rumors suggested that a member of the royal family had expressed strong concerns about losing valuable staff members. James felt his heart racing as he realized Prince George's quiet advocacy had somehow achieved the impossible. During the morning briefing, the head of security made an official announcement that left James struggling to maintain composure. His position would be retained after all, along with several other longtime employees who had faced forced retirement. The administrator mentioned specific feedback about the value of experience and institutional knowledge, using language that echoed Prince George's previous evening's words almost exactly. James found himself reassigned to Prince George's personal security detail on a permanent basis, a position that recognized his experience while creating opportunities for the unique relationship that had developed between them. The arrangement satisfied administrative efficiency concerns while honoring the human elements that Prince George had championed so effectively behind the scenes. The morning passed in a blur of congratulations from colleagues and adjustments to new responsibilities. James felt overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of his circumstances, transforming professional catastrophe into unexpected recognition. The emotional whiplash of recent days had left him grateful, but uncertain about how to process such dramatic changes. Prince George appeared for his usual morning routine, but something had shifted in their dynamic. The previous evening's conversation had created a foundation for different kinds of interaction, though both maintained appropriate professional boundaries. James noticed the boys' subtle smiles and occasional meaningful glances that acknowledged their shared secret. Throughout the day, James observed Prince George with new understanding. The boys' interactions with other staff members revealed ongoing attention to their welfare and working conditions. James realized the previous evening had not been an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of quiet leadership and moral engagement that had been developing for some time. During lunch, James overheard conversations about how the administrative reversals had been achieved so quickly. Several senior staff members expressed surprise about the efficiency of the decision-making process, suggesting that powerful advocacy had influenced outcomes that would normally take weeks or months to resolve. James kept his knowledge private, while marveling at Prince George's effectiveness. The afternoon brought a formal ceremony where James and several other retained employees received official recognition for their service. Prince George attended with other family members, maintaining perfect protocol while occasionally catching James's eye with expressions that conveyed private satisfaction about the morning's developments. The boy had orchestrated a significant victory while maintaining complete discretion. Speaking with fellow guards who had also been retained, James learned that each had received private conversations or interactions with Prince George over recent weeks. The boy had apparently been conducting a comprehensive assessment of staff situations, gathering information that informed his subsequent advocacy efforts. His approach had been systematic and thoughtful rather than impulsive. As evening approached, James felt a profound shift in his relationship with his work and the palace itself. The institution that had seemed ready to discard him had instead recognized his value, largely through the intervention of a 12-year-old who understood justice and loyalty in ways that exceeded his years. The experience had restored James's faith while teaching him about unexpected sources of wisdom. The day concluded with James performing his new duties with renewed energy and purpose. His position now carried different responsibilities that acknowledged his experience while creating opportunities for continued growth. The forced retirement that had seemed like professional death had transformed into a chance for meaningful evolution. Prince George's evening routine proceeded normally, but James noticed the boy's obvious satisfaction with the day's developments. The prince had achieved something remarkable without seeking recognition or credit, demonstrating leadership qualities that suggested extraordinary potential for his future role. His quiet intervention had changed multiple lives while teaching important lessons about using influence responsibly. Preparing for sleep, James reflected on how completely his circumstances had changed within a few days. The despair and uncertainty that had dominated his thoughts had been replaced by gratitude and renewed commitment. Prince George had not only saved his career, but had also shown him new possibilities for service that honored both efficiency and human dignity. The evening brought peaceful rest for the first time in days, with James's dreams filled with images of continued service and meaningful work. His relationship with Prince George had evolved into something unique and valuable, promising future opportunities for mutual learning and growth that neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed in those palace corridors. 3 months later, James stood in the palace garden during his final official ceremony before transitioning to advisory status. His new role would combine security consultation with mentoring responsibilities, allowing him to share decades of experience while gradually preparing for genuine retirement on his own terms. Prince George had created a solution that honored both institutional needs and human dignity. The ceremony attracted attention from royal family members, senior staff, and guards who had served alongside James throughout his career. As speeches honored his contributions, James noticed Prince George standing slightly apart from the formal group, watching with quiet satisfaction rather than seeking recognition for his role in creating this moment. The boy's humility impressed James as much as his earlier intervention had. When called forward to receive his service recognition, James walked across the garden with steady steps and deep gratitude. The medal represented more than career achievement. It symbolized the value of dedication, the power of unexpected advocacy, and the importance of relationships that transcend official protocols. Prince George had taught him that true leadership could emerge from surprising sources. During his speech, James carefully acknowledged those who had supported him, without revealing specific details about Prince George's intervention. He spoke about the importance of recognizing human value alongside efficiency, using language that honored the boy's wisdom while maintaining appropriate discretion. The prince smiled slightly, understanding the subtle tribute to their private conversations. After the ceremony, James found himself alone with Prince George for a few moments near the garden fountain, where they had first sat together during his moment of weakness. The boy had grown noticeably in the intervening months, not just physically but in confidence and presence. He spoke about continuing their informal mentorship even as James's official duties changed. Prince George revealed that their conversations had influenced his thinking about leadership responsibilities in ways that would guide his future development. He credited James with helping him understand how to balance institutional requirements with moral obligations, lessons that would prove valuable throughout his life. The boy's gratitude touched James deeply, completing a circle of mutual learning and respect. The afternoon brought private meetings with colleagues who would assume James's former responsibilities. He shared insights about specific security challenges, relationship management, and the subtle aspects of palace protection that couldn't be learned from manuals or training programs. His knowledge would continue benefiting the institution even as his role evolved. Evening found James in his quarters, preparing for the transition ceremony that would mark his formal change in status. He dressed in his dress uniform one final time, ensuring every detail met the standards he had maintained for 37 years. This would be his actual final bow as an active guard, a moment made meaningful by everything that had preceded it. The transition ceremony took place in the palace's formal reception room, with Prince George serving as the presenting officer despite his youth. The boy had requested this honor, arguing that James's new advisory role would primarily support the younger generation's development. His logic impressed the adults while creating a perfect symbolic conclusion to their shared journey. When Prince George officially transferred James to advisory status, the old guard's bow carried all the dignity and precision of his long career. The gesture represented respect for tradition while acknowledging evolution toward something new and valuable. Prince George's return salute demonstrated equal respect, recognizing James as a mentor rather than just a subordinate. The reception following the ceremony provided opportunities for James to speak with colleagues, family members, and royal staff about his transition. Many expressed gratitude for his service while sharing anticipation about his continued contributions in his new capacity. The evening felt like celebration rather than conclusion, reflecting the positive nature of changes Prince George had engineered. As the evening wound down, Prince George approached James one final time in his official capacity as a guard. The boy thanked him formally for his service before speaking quietly about their continuing relationship. He promised to seek James's advice regularly, ensuring their mentor-student dynamic would continue developing in years ahead. Walking through the palace corridors one last time as an active guard, James felt peace rather than sadness about his transition. The institution he loved had found ways to honor his experience while embracing necessary changes. Prince George had demonstrated that evolution could occur without sacrificing the human elements that gave service true meaning. In his quarters that night, James hung up his regular uniform while keeping his dress uniform for future ceremonial occasions. His new role would require different clothing, but the same commitment to excellence and service that had guided his entire career. Prince George had given him the gift of ending one chapter while beginning another with dignity and tact. Sleep came easily, filled with dreams about continued service and meaningful relationships. The boy who had seemed like just another royal charge had revealed himself as a teacher, advocate, and friend who understood leadership in ways that promised hope for the future. James's final bow had been not an ending but a transformation into something unexpectedly wonderful.